And then the tragic narrative and speculation, imagination, important on the bottom of page 205. This is, moreover, like all good tragedies, whether it be a tragic novel or tragic play or a tragic film, whatever. Mary's story invites us to speculate, to imagine what might have been, as several visitors put it, and to deliberate those many unanswered questions about her character and her actions, as well as those of her allies and antagonists that have preoccupied historians, biographers, poets, novelists, and playwrights for so long. Elizabeth was brilliant, one woman noted, but so was Mary. I see that now. To think of the timing of the two of them at once, and what if? Her voice trailed off, leaving the many what-ifs unarticulated before reaching the conclusion that all tragedies invite us to reach. Well, things might have been very different. So basically, it's this whole idea of, we're speculating, we're using our imagination to help us, in a sense, craft public memory, to speculate. Historians don't like that. They want real. But can there be? I don't know. Okay, the next slide with slide 9, more about traces. There's a little bit about religion in there and about sectarian differences, and I think we could probably relate some of that stuff to issues of race. One visitor, when they were sort of reflecting on this entire thing and all the various problems that occurred and are still occurring between Protestants and Catholics, and even today, it's amazing how it just drives me crazy that one person can say my religion is better than your religion. That's not an educated way of looking at the world. But in any case, one of the visitors, Riley, concluded after recounting her own story of sectarian prejudice, it's like a curse, like a racial memory with us. And so that's one thing that I was thinking about. We could probably use, how are some of the racial problems that we've been dealing with, particularly when it comes to Caucasian versus African American in the South, how can we relate that to our study of Magnolia Plantation? And then that last paragraph in this section is a really good summary of what he's trying to get at. The Mary Queen of Scots House and Visitor Center affords a variety of interpretive possibilities. So, a variety of things that I can get out of this tour. Notice that he's not particularly interested in official memory. So it's a different vantage point here. People engage in different practices as they tour the house, and there's a wide range of options for linking up with other aspects of Mary Stuart's life and the imagery and mythology that now seems almost indistinguishable from that life than those themes I have discussed above. However, there is always a dynamic interplay between an interest in the real historical woman and the romantic iconography and tales that people carry with them from other contexts and media. The tragic and romantic figure of their imaginations go hand in hand with the tracing of their own pasts, both personal and national, and has significant implications for how they interpret the narratives, images, and artifacts at the site. The play of fantasy and personal memory, and the search for knowledge or information about a historical figure and Scottish or British cultural heritage intersect and blend in important ways in visitors' evaluations of the site. And these evaluations have as much to do with the performance of remembrance they enact on the site as with the rhetorical performance of the site itself. Long story short, your own life, any sort of issues of race, class, gender, messages about plantations that perhaps you've gotten from watching things like Gone with the Wind, North and South, or all that other stuff. That stuff impacts the way that you will interpret your tour of Magnolia Plantation. We come to any sort of tour with baggage, and that's sort of in part the idea. Even as the tour itself, the site itself offers this sort of ironic sort of tension between is this authentic, is it not authentic. We always bring our own sort of imagination with us as we are trying to interpret. Think about, going to Fort Sumter, and if you've ever seen Civil War films, they actually even talk about glory and stuff like that. How does your viewing of that stuff impact the way that you think things were like back in the day? And then you carry that baggage with you as you interpret things through your own tour. So that's, in a sense, the point here. The last section and the big theoretical points, memory sites versus memory environments, authenticity versus staged or stage authenticity. I think it's staged. So basically Michael blows all that stuff up. Basically saying that you can't create those types of dichotomies. This last section is really quite brilliant. It's called Destination Mary Queen of Scots. And so, for instance, Nora, again, we've talked about her quite a bit, distinguishing between memory sites and memory environments on the basis of the artificiality of the former and the authenticity of the latter. And then critics of heritage tourism say, some things are authentic, some things are staged authenticity. He's just blowing that stuff up, saying that, if we really want to understand how places work, it's all at the same time. We can't create these dichotomies because we're always going to interpret things in different ways. And so then what he does in order to help him explain that theoretically, he borrows from the Derrida and talks about the idea of ontology. And I know that's very, very confusing, and it's not particularly about ghost per se, but it's a very important idea, ontology. And if you've ever listened to thunder, if you've ever listened to or if you've ever been in my classes, and I've talked about rhetoric, and even in this class about it being epistemological, ontological, and rugs are dry. Doing laundry. I'm double voiced right now. Part teacher, part laundry cleaner. This notion that ontology is sort of another one of those ologies. And so basically, this is what he says. In this particular case, I want to suggest, this is on the bottom of page 208, I want to suggest that such an orientation, this orientation that he's talking about to tourism in general, allows us to focus less on the epistemological issues of the particular site, what it says or knows, or on the ontological question of the site's authenticity, was this the place, the being, and to consider instead what might be called the ontological question of how the site recruits and mobilizes bodies to perform acts of remembrance. Yeah. So one of the things here, if you move down, Jameson, this is on page 209, as Frederick Jameson explains, the concern for ontology has little to do with whether one believes in ghosts or the more banal assertion that the past is still alive in the present. All it says, if it can be thought to speak, is that the living present is scarcely as self-sufficient as it claims to be, that we would do well not to count on its density and solidity, which might, under exceptional circumstances, betray us. Ontology offers us a far more generous way of understanding visitors' expressions of fondness for and interest in history and heritage than dismissing their remarks as mere nostalgia. While they may leave the house without the sort of knowledge and understanding that might satisfy an historian, their performances of remembrance enact an affective and ethical relation to history, or something about which we would be considered, which we should be considered, or history as something about which we should be considered, precisely because it invites us to question the density and solidity as well as the inevitability of the present. I know that makes no sense. It makes a little bit of sense. But basically, it's messy. Let me continue. That this idea that the spaces of tourism do not comprise some sort of Euclidean grid around which self presents actors move, but rather a crumpled space where people and places are in process. So it's just it's messy. It's not just past is alive and present. But everything is an amalgamation of everything else. And the idea here, I know this is getting too complicated. But one of the things that I'm thinking about, it reminds me, going back to the State House paper that I wrote and submitted, that you can go back and look at the reading if you so desire. I put it on Tumblr. But this idea that they talk about in the book a lot about place. It's contained. But I'm arguing, and I think this is what Ontology asks us to do, to broaden it up closer to space. That going on a tour at Fort Sumter is going to be, there's past, present, and future. It's also going to be linked to my own imagination of what it was like to be there, my own reading that I have done, the movies that I watch, and all that type of stuff. It's just, it's not so easy as to say, here it is. This is the history. This is what happened. It's much more complicated than that, and that's really what the idea of ontology, I think, is. That the whole idea of memory is never set. It's constant motion and process. And then it talks about the fantastic realism and doubt. And again, this whole section is really, really interesting. And basically, the idea here was that the tour itself creates doubt. And so what he's interested in is this idea of what Holdrich calls fantastic realism. A haunting where objects and spaces and images and stories and heritage sites lose their aura and become traces in Benjamin's sense, allowing visitors to be at once possessed by the site and to take possession of it as well. So it's almost as if it's not history, it's not authentic, nor is it inauthentic. It is a fantastic realism that we are captured or haunted by this place, but we also take possession of it as we interpret it, given our own baggage. The middle paragraph of 211 is very, very important as well. And again, the last paragraph, basically just read the whole damn thing. But basically, this is what he says. As visitors tour, and I think we can broaden this up to lots of different things, not just this particular house. All this stuff is general stuff. As the visitors tour the building, they tack back and forth between a state of flow and flexivity, the double consciousness inherent to the performance, where one part of them is walking in Mary's footsteps, following her trail, while another is wholly aware that Mary may never have walked here at all. This is a far more complex kind of engagement with the past and a more complex set of pleasures than the cartoonish image of cultural dopes consuming history-light packages on the fly that the heritage baiters have propagated. And while many historians still have reservations about how memory or collective memory or popular memory may relate to our best informed historical study, the example of Mary and her house suggests that part of the answer lies not simply in separating the historical truth from the distortions of memory or popular culture, but in discovering truths contained in our affective, emotional relations to the past, the ways in which our performances of remembrance make the past present, albeit the kind of presence governed by the differential logic of the trace, the haunting. Such performance of remembrance displace ontological questions of authenticity and epistemological questions of information and knowledge with a hauntological concern for ethics and justice. And I will let you read that last paragraph. No, I'll read it for you just because it's so damn good. But whereas Wormald sees this as a barrier, that is, the history versus this stuff, as a barrier to a more authentic engagement with Scottish and British history, the MQSH enables, by virtue of its space and rhetoric, an experience that allows people to perform in such a way as to lose their heads, albeit in figurative and reflexive